The wedding invitation in my hands felt like a slap in the face. After everything I'd done for this family, after all the years of friendship, I was being uninvited to my best friend's wedding. But what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about loyalty, honor, and the true meaning of family. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Rachel Morrison, and this story began 3 months before what should have been the happiest day of my best friend's life. Sarah Chen and I had been inseparable since college, roommates, confidants, and sisters, in every way that mattered except blood. When she got engaged to Marcus Rodriguez, a decorated army captain she'd met at a charity gala, I was the first person she called. "Rachel, you have to be my maid of honor," she'd squealed through the phone that night. "I can't imagine walking down that aisle without you by my side." I'd spent the next 2.5 months throwing myself into wedding preparations with the dedication of a military operation. I coordinated with florists, taste-tested cakes until I was sick of buttercream, and spent countless weekends driving to bridal shops across 3 states to find the perfect dress. Sarah's mother, Patricia Chen, had specific ideas about everything, and I made it my mission to execute her vision flawlessly. Patricia was old-fashioned in ways that sometimes made me uncomfortable, but I respected her devotion to tradition and her desire to give her daughter a perfect wedding. She came from a wealthy family in San Francisco and had very particular ideas about propriety and social standing. Her husband David was more laid back, but he generally deferred to his wife's wishes when it came to their only daughter's big day. The problem started when Sarah's cousin Emma flew in from Portland 2 weeks before the wedding. Emma had always been the golden child of the Chen family, a successful lawyer who'd married young, had 2 perfect children, and maintained the kind of polished image that Patricia adored. She also had strong opinions about everything and wasn't shy about sharing them. "I'm concerned about some of the choices being made for this wedding," Emma announced during a family dinner that I'd been invited to attend. Her eyes swept over me with barely concealed disapproval. "I think we need to reconsider some of the arrangements." I felt a chill run down my spine, though I couldn't understand why. Everything was going perfectly according to plan. The venue was booked, the flowers were ordered, and the dress had been altered to perfection. Sarah looked confused too, glancing between her cousin and her mother with growing anxiety. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with worry. Emma pulled out her phone and began scrolling through what appeared to be screenshots of social media posts. "I've been doing some research on the wedding party, and I've discovered some concerning information about Rachel's background." My blood ran cold. I knew exactly what she'd found, and I knew how it would look to someone like Patricia Chen. 3 years ago, I'd gone through a very public and messy divorce from my ex-husband, Tyler. The proceedings had been ugly, involving accusations and counter-accusations that had played out across local news outlets and social media. While I'd been completely vindicated in the end, the internet never forgets, and Emma had apparently spent considerable time digging through old articles and forum posts. "She was involved in a major scandal," Emma continued, her voice dripping with false concern. "There were allegations of financial impropriety, questions about her character. The family name could be damaged by association." "That's not fair," I started to protest, but Patricia held up her hand to silence me. "Is this true, Rachel?" Patricia's voice was ice cold. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. There was a difficult divorce, yes. My ex-husband made false accusations during custody proceedings, trying to gain leverage. Everything was investigated thoroughly by the authorities, and I was completely cleared of any wrongdoing. The court records are public if you'd like to review them. But I could see in Patricia's eyes that the damage was already done. She was the kind of woman who believed that avoiding even the appearance of impropriety was more important than the truth itself. In her social circle, being associated with any kind of scandal, even as an innocent victim, was unacceptable. Sarah looked stricken. "Mom, Rachel is my best friend. She's been planning this wedding for months. She's done everything perfectly." "I understand your loyalty, dear," Patricia said, her voice softening slightly when she looked at her daughter. "But we have to think about appearances. What will people think? What will Marcus's family think?" Marcus had been quiet throughout this exchange, but now he spoke up. Mrs. Chen, with all due respect, Rachel has been nothing but dedicated to making this wedding perfect. I've watched her work tirelessly for Sarah's happiness. Whatever happened in her past has nothing to do with her character as I've observed it. I felt a surge of gratitude toward Marcus. He barely knew me, but he was willing to defend me based on what he'd seen over the past few months. It was more than I could say for the woman I'd considered a second mother. Emma wasn't finished, though. There's also the matter of her current financial situation, she said, consulting her phone again. I've heard she's been having some difficulties. What if she can't afford the dress alterations? What if she defaults on her maid of honor responsibilities? This was partially true, and it stung because I'd been trying so hard to hide my struggles. My divorce had left me in a precarious financial position, and I'd been working extra hours at my marketing job just to afford my bridesmaid dress and the various expenses that came with being in a wedding. I'd never once asked Sarah or her family for financial help, and I'd managed to keep up with every obligation, despite the strain on my budget. That's enough, Sarah said, standing up from the table. I don't care what Emma found online, and I don't care about money. Rachel is my maid of honor, and that's final. But Patricia's mind was made up. Over the next week, she began a subtle campaign to push me out of the wedding. She started by suggesting that maybe I'd be more comfortable as a regular guest rather than having the pressure of maid of honor duties. When I politely declined her offer to step back, she became more direct. Rachel, dear, I think it would be best for everyone if you took a smaller role in the ceremony, she said during a phone call that caught me completely off guard. Emma has offered to step in as maid of honor, and she has so much experience with high society weddings. I was devastated, but I tried to remain diplomatic. Patricia, I understand your concerns, but Sarah asked me to be her maid of honor. This decision should be hers to make. Sarah is young and emotional, Patricia replied dismissively. She's not thinking clearly about the implications. As her mother, it's my responsibility to protect her from making decisions she'll regret. The final blow came just 5 days before the wedding. I received a certified letter in the mail, not a phone call, not even an email, but a formal letter written on Chen family letterhead. It informed me that my invitation to the wedding had been rescinded due to unforeseen circumstances, and that my presence would no longer be required at any wedding-related events. I called Sarah immediately, but the call went straight to voicemail. I tried again and again, but she wouldn't answer. Finally, I drove to her apartment, only to find Emma there instead. Sarah's not seeing visitors right now, Emma said, blocking the doorway. She's very upset about having to make this difficult decision, but she knows it's for the best. Let me talk to her, I pleaded. We can work this out. The decision is final, Rachel. Please don't make this harder than it already is. I spent the next 3 days in a haze of disbelief and heartbreak. I'd lost my best friend, been excluded from what should have been one of the happiest days of her life, and been branded as a social pariah by people who barely knew me. I considered a dozen different ways to reach out to Sarah, but Emma seemed to have formed an impenetrable barrier around her. On the morning of the wedding, I woke up with a strange sense of clarity. I realized that while I couldn't control what the Chen family thought of me, I could control how I responded to this situation. I could either let their judgment define me, or I could find another way to show Sarah that I still cared about her happiness, regardless of whether I was welcome at her celebration. I had no idea that my decision to act on that clarity would lead to a moment that would change everything, not just for me, but for everyone who thought they knew what honor really meant. The wedding was being held at the Grandview Manor, an elegant estate venue about 30 minutes outside the city. I'd helped Patricia choose it during one of our many planning sessions, back when I was still considered family. The irony wasn't lost on me that I knew every detail of this celebration, from the specific shade of blush roses Sarah had chosen to the exact timing of the cocktail hour. Yet I was now banned from attending. But I couldn't just sit at home wallowing in self-pity while my best friend got married. There had to be something I could do, some way to show Sarah that despite everything that had happened, I still wanted her to have the perfect day she'd always dreamed of. That's when I remembered Marcus mentioning his military background and the traditions that were important to him. During one of our earlier conversations, He'd told me about his unit, the 82nd Airborne Division, and how several of his army buddies would be attending the ceremony in their dress uniforms. He'd seemed particularly proud of the fact that his commanding officer, Colonel James Patterson, would be there to witness the ceremony. An idea began forming in my mind. It was risky, maybe even foolish, but it felt right in a way that nothing else had since receiving that devastating letter. I spent the morning researching military wedding traditions and protocols. I learned about the significance of the saber arch, the meaning behind different ceremonial elements, and the deep respect that military personnel hold for traditions of honor and loyalty. What struck me most was discovering that in military culture, true loyalty isn't about blind obedience to authority. It's about doing what's right, even when it's difficult. By noon, I'd made my decision. I drove to a specialty shop downtown and purchased a small American flag, the kind that veterans' families often display at memorial services. Then I stopped at a florist. Not the expensive one Patricia had chosen for the wedding flowers, but a small local shop run by an elderly man named Frank who'd served in Vietnam. Panosakanbane. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. When I explained what I wanted to do, Frank's weathered face broke into a knowing smile. "Young lady, what you're planning takes real courage. Your friend is lucky to have someone like you in her life, even if she doesn't realize it right now." He helped me create a small, tasteful arrangement of white roses and baby's breath, designed to complement the wedding's color scheme without competing with the official flowers. It was simple, elegant, and meaningful. Everything I hoped my gesture would be. The afternoon stretched endlessly as I waited for the right time to put my plan into action. I kept checking my phone, half hoping Sarah would call and ask me to come back, but knowing she wouldn't. Emma had made sure of that, positioning herself as the protector of the Chen family's reputation. At 4 o'clock, I drove to Grandview Manor. The parking lot was already filling with guests, women in pastel dresses and men in crisp suits, all chatting excitedly about the upcoming ceremony. I recognized several faces from college and from Sarah's extended social circle, people who would probably be shocked to learn I'd been disinvited. I parked at the far edge of the lot, under a grove of oak trees where my car wouldn't be easily noticed. From there, I had a clear view of the main entrance and the gardens, where the ceremony would take place. I could see the white chairs arranged in perfect rows, the altar decorated with those blush roses I'd helped select, and the archway where Sarah and Marcus would exchange vows. My heart clenched as I watched the wedding party arrive. There was Emma, wearing the maid of honor dress that should have been mine, directing the other bridesmaids with an air of self-importance that made my stomach turn. The bridesmaids looked confused and kept glancing around as if they were looking for someone. Probably me. Then I saw Sarah step out of a white limousine, and my breath caught in my throat. She looked absolutely stunning in the dress we'd chosen together during a marathon shopping trip that had ended with both of us in tears of joy. The dress fit her perfectly thanks to the alterations I'd coordinated, and her hair was styled exactly the way we'd practiced during our trial run with the hairdresser. But something was wrong with her expression. Even from a distance, I could see that she didn't have the radiant glow that every bride should have on her wedding day. She looked anxious, almost sad, and she kept scanning the crowd as if she was searching for something or someone. Marcus emerged from a separate car with his groomsmen, all impressive in their military dress uniforms. Even I had to admit they made a striking picture, tall, proud, and dignified. Marcus looked every inch the honorable soldier, but when he saw Sarah's expression, concern immediately clouded his features. I watched him approach her and say something that made her shake her head sadly. He took her hands in his, clearly trying to comfort her, but I could see from her body language that whatever he was saying wasn't helping. That's when I knew I'd made the right decision to come. Sarah was miserable on what should have been the happiest day of her life, and while I couldn't fix everything that had gone wrong between us, maybe I could still find a way to give her one moment of joy. The ceremony was scheduled to begin at 5 o'clock. At 4:30, I gathered my courage, picked up the small floral arrangement and the folded American flag, and made my way toward the venue's service entrance. I'd noticed during my earlier visit that there was a maintenance road that led behind the gardens, providing access for catering trucks and other vendors. My plan was simple. I would position myself where I could see the ceremony but wouldn't be noticed by the guests. When the appropriate moment came, after the vows but before the recessional, I would step forward and present the flag and flowers to Marcus as a gesture of respect for his service and support for their marriage. It wasn't about crashing the wedding or making a scene. It was about honoring the traditions that mattered to the groom, while showing Sarah that my friendship transcended whatever petty social concerns had driven us apart. I made it to my chosen spot without incident, hidden behind a large pergola covered in climbing roses. From there, I had a perfect view of the altar and could hear every word of the ceremony. The officiant was a military chaplain that Marcus had requested, and his words about duty, honor, and commitment resonated deeply with the solemnity of the moment. Sarah's voice shook slightly as she recited her vows, and I could see tears streaming down her face. But they weren't tears of joy, they were tears of sadness and regret. She kept glancing toward the section where I should have been sitting, and I realized that my absence was casting a shadow over her entire wedding day. Marcus, on the other hand, spoke his vows with clear, strong conviction. His words about protecting and honoring his bride, about standing by her through whatever challenges they might face, were delivered with the kind of sincerity that only comes from someone who truly understands the weight of commitment. When the chaplain pronounced them husband and wife, the applause was enthusiastic but somehow felt hollow. Sarah smiled and kissed her new husband, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of waiting for the planned moment during the recessional, I stepped out from behind the pergola and began walking slowly toward the altar, the folded flag in one hand and the flowers in the other. The first person to notice me was Marcus himself. His eyes widened in surprise, but not displeasure. Then the guests began to turn, and I heard the sharp intake of breath that signaled Patricia Chen had spotted me. "Security!" Emma's voice cut through the air like a knife. But something extraordinary happened next. Marcus stepped forward, away from his new wife, and began walking toward me with purpose. His fellow soldiers, recognizing something in his demeanor, came to attention. And that's when everything I thought I knew about honor, loyalty, and family was about to be turned completely upside down. The moment Marcus began walking toward me, the entire atmosphere of the wedding shifted. What had been a traditional, carefully orchestrated ceremony suddenly became something raw and unpredictable. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me, could hear the whispered gasps and confused murmurs rippling through the crowd like waves. Patricia Chen's face had gone white with fury, and she was frantically gesturing to the security guards stationed near the entrance. But the guards seemed hesitant to act, perhaps recognizing that something significant was happening that went beyond a simple wedding crasher situation. Emma was practically vibrating with indignation. "This is completely inappropriate," she hissed to anyone within earshot. "She's ruining everything." But Marcus continued walking toward me with steady, measured steps, his dress uniform pristine, and his bearing unmistakably military. Behind him, I could see his groomsmen, all fellow soldiers, exchanging meaningful glances. They seemed to understand something that the civilian guests did not. Colonel Patterson, Marcus's commanding officer, stepped forward from the crowd. He was an imposing man in his 50s, with silver hair and the kind of presence that commanded instant respect. Instead of trying to stop what was happening, he moved to a position where he could observe more clearly, his expression serious but not disapproving. When Marcus reached me, he stopped about 3 feet away and came to attention. The formality of his posture sent a clear message to everyone watching. This wasn't a casual encounter or a social mistake. This was something that mattered to him as a soldier. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent garden, "I understand you have something you'd like to present." My hands were shaking as I held up the folded American flag. "Captain Rodriguez, I wanted to honor your service and your commitment to protecting the values that make celebrations like this possible. This flag represents the sacrifice and dedication of all who serve." Marcus's eyes never left mine as I spoke, and I could see something shifting in his expression, a recognition of the gesture's significance that went far beyond the wedding drama surrounding us. "Thank you, ma'am," he replied formally. "It would be my honor to accept this on behalf of all service members." He took the flag from my hands with the reverence reserved for such moments, holding it carefully against his chest. Then, something unexpected happened. Instead of simply accepting the gesture and returning to his bride, Marcus took a step back and rendered a sharp, precise military salute. The effect was electric. Every soldier in attendance immediately came to attention and returned the salute, including Colonel Patterson. The garden fell completely silent, except for the rustle of wind through the oak trees and the distant sound of traffic from the highway. For 30 seconds that felt like an eternity, we stood frozen in that tableau. Marcus saluting me, his fellow soldiers at attention, and the wedding guests watching in stunned confusion. It was a moment of pure military tradition playing out in the midst of civilian social politics, and the contrast was stark. When Marcus finally lowered his hand, he looked directly at Sarah, who had been watching the entire exchange with tears streaming down her face. Not the sad, regretful tears from earlier, but something different. Recognition, perhaps, or relief. "Sarah," Marcus said, his voice gentle but firm. "This woman has shown more honor and respect for our marriage than anyone else here today. She came not to disrupt, but to acknowledge what this day means to us. That's the kind of loyalty and character I want in our lives." Patricia Chen finally found her voice. "This is absolutely unacceptable. She was not invited. She has no right to be here." But Colonel Patterson stepped forward before anyone else could respond. "Ma'am," he said, addressing Patricia with military courtesy but unmistakable authority, "what I just witnessed was a demonstration of honor, respect, and selfless service to others. These are the values we defend, and they deserve recognition regardless of social circumstances." He turned to address the entire gathering, his voice carrying the weight of command. "In my 30 years of military service, I've learned that true character is revealed not in moments of comfort and convenience, but in moments of difficulty and sacrifice. What this young woman did today, coming here not for herself, but to honor the commitment between these two people, that's what real friendship looks like." The colonel's words seemed to break whatever spell had held the crowd in frozen shock. People began murmuring again, but the tone had shifted dramatically. Instead of scandal and disapproval, there was confusion, curiosity, and in some cases, admiration. Marcus handed the flag to one of his groomsmen and walked over to Sarah, taking her hands in his. "Sweetheart, I need you to know something. In the 3 months I've been watching Rachel help plan our wedding, I've seen nothing but dedication, generosity, and love for you. Whatever happened in her past, whatever people are saying about her now, none of that changes who she's shown herself to be." Sarah was crying openly now, no longer trying to maintain the composed facade that had been expected of her all day. "I know," she whispered. "I've known all along. I just didn't know how to fight back against everyone telling me I was making a mistake." "You don't have to fight," Marcus replied. "We just have to choose what's right." He turned back toward me, still standing awkwardly with the flower arrangement in my hands, unsure whether I should stay or go. The last thing I wanted was to cause more conflict on their wedding day. "Rachel," Marcus called out, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Sarah and I would be honored if you would join us for the reception, not as a guest but as family." The gasps from the crowd were audible this time. Emma looked like she might faint, and Patricia's face had progressed from white to red to an alarming shade of purple. But Sarah was nodding eagerly, her eyes bright with the joy that had been missing all day. "Yes," she said, stepping away from her mother and walking toward me. "Rachel, I'm so sorry. I should have fought harder. I should have stood up for you." We embraced there in front of everyone, both of us crying and laughing at the same time. The flower arrangement got crushed between us, but neither of us cared. We were friends again, sisters again, and nothing else mattered. Colonel Patterson began applauding, a slow, deliberate clap that was soon joined by the other military personnel. Gradually, more and more guests joined in, until the entire garden was filled with the sound of approval. But the drama wasn't over yet. Emma stormed forward, her face twisted with rage and embarrassment. "This is a disaster! Mother, you can't allow this to continue." Patricia looked around at the crowd, at her daughter's radiant face, at Marcus's unwavering support, and at the obvious approval of the military guests who represented a significant portion of the wedding party. For the first time since I'd known her, she seemed to realize that her social calculations had led her astray. "Emma," she said quietly, "perhaps we should discuss this later." But Emma wasn't ready to give up. "If she stays, I leave. It's that simple. Choose between family loyalty and this person who doesn't belong here." The ultimatum hung in the air like a challenge. Everyone waited to see how the family would respond, how Sarah would handle being forced to choose between her cousin and her best friend. That's when Marcus did something that surprised everyone, including me. He stepped forward and addressed Emma directly, his military bearing giving weight to every word he spoke. "Ma'am, with all due respect, you've misunderstood what family loyalty means. It's not about excluding people or protecting social standing. It's about standing by those who stand by you, regardless of the cost. Rachel has demonstrated that kind of loyalty today. I hope you'll choose to do the same." The challenge was clear, and everyone understood it. This wasn't just about wedding guest lists anymore. This was about fundamental values, about what kind of people they all chose to be when faced with a moment of truth. Emma's response would determine not just how the rest of the wedding day would unfold, but how this family would define itself going forward. Emma's ultimatum created a moment of profound silence that seemed to stretch across the entire garden. The wedding guests, who had come expecting a pleasant afternoon celebration, now found themselves witnessing a family crisis that would define relationships for years to come. I could see the calculation happening behind Emma's eyes. She was so certain of her position in the family hierarchy, so confident that her status as the successful lawyer cousin would carry more weight than my friendship with Sarah. She stood there with her arms crossed, waiting for Patricia to make the obvious choice and ask me to leave. But something had shifted in the family dynamics during Marcus's speech. David Chen, who had been quietly observing from the sidelines throughout the entire ordeal, stepped forward for the first time. Sarah's father was typically a man of few words, preferring to let his wife handle social situations, but his daughter's wedding day had apparently pushed him past his usual boundaries. "Emma," David said, his voice calm but firm, "I think you've forgotten whose wedding this is." His words carried a weight that surprised everyone, including Patricia. David rarely contradicted his wife in public, and he'd never openly challenged Emma's opinions before. But as he continued speaking, it became clear that he'd been watching and listening more carefully than anyone had realized. "I've spent the past 3 months watching Rachel work tirelessly to make this day perfect for my daughter," he continued. "She coordinated with vendors, managed schedules, and handled a dozen crises that could have ruined the entire celebration. She did all of this without asking for recognition or compensation, and she did it with grace even when faced with criticism." David looked directly at me as he spoke, and I could see respect in his eyes that I'd never noticed before. More importantly, I've watched my daughter's face every time Rachel's name comes up. Sarah lights up when she talks about her best friend. That's not something you throw away because of gossip and old scandals. Emma's confidence began to waver as she realized that the support she'd expected wasn't materializing. "Uncle David, you don't understand the implications." "I understand perfectly," David interrupted, something he'd never done to Emma before. "I understand that you've spent more time researching Rachel's past than getting to know her character. I understand that you've created drama where none needed to exist. And I understand that my daughter has been miserable for the past week because she was forced to choose between family pressure and her closest friendship." Patricia looked stunned by her husband's unusually forceful stance. She glanced between David, Sarah, and Marcus, clearly trying to read the room and determine which way the wind was blowing. For a woman who prided herself on social intuition, she seemed genuinely surprised by how the situation was developing. Marcus seized the moment to address the broader wedding party. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption to our celebration, but I want everyone here to understand something important. In the military, we have a saying, 'Leave no one behind.' It means that we don't abandon our people when things get difficult. We stand by those who stand by us." He gestured toward me, still holding the crushed flower arrangement. "Rachel could have stayed home today. She could have nursed her hurt feelings and let resentment poison her friendship with my wife. Instead, she came here to honor our marriage, even knowing she wasn't welcome. That's the kind of person I want in our lives, and it's the kind of loyalty I want our children to learn about. The mention of future children seemed to strike Sarah powerfully. She looked at Marcus with such love and admiration that it was almost painful to witness. Then she turned to face her family directly, her voice stronger than it had been all day. "I'm 26 years old," Sarah said. "I have a college degree, a successful career, and I just married a man who serves our country with honor. I'm capable of choosing my own friends, and I'm tired of being treated like a child who can't make good decisions." She walked over to me and took my hand. "Rachel has been my sister in every way that matters for 5 years. She was there when I failed my first job interview. She held my hair when I had food poisoning. She listened to me cry about dating disasters and celebrated with me when I got promoted. She's earned her place in my life through years of friendship, not through accident of birth or family connections." Emma's face was flushed with embarrassment and anger. She clearly hadn't expected this level of pushback from the family members she'd assumed would support her position. "Fine," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled rage. "But don't come crying to me when this decision comes back to haunt you. Some people don't change, Sarah. Some people will always be magnets for drama and scandal." "You're right," Sarah replied calmly. "Some people don't change. Some people will always look for ways to create division and conflict, even at family celebrations. But I'm choosing to surround myself with people who build up rather than tear down." The implication was clear, and Emma's face went white with shock. She'd expected to be vindicated, not dismissed. She looked around at the wedding guests, perhaps hoping to find allies in the crowd, but most people were either looking uncomfortable or actively supportive of Sarah's stance. Colonel Patterson stepped forward again, his military bearing commanding attention. "If I may," he said, "I'd like to share something that might provide some perspective on this situation." The garden fell quiet as everyone turned to listen to the commanding officer. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to making difficult decisions under pressure. "In my experience, the most dangerous people are not those who have faced adversity and overcome it," the colonel said. "The most dangerous people are those who have never been tested, who have never had to prove their character under pressure. When crisis comes, and it always comes, you want people beside you who have already demonstrated their ability to persevere. Once Pexicle," he looked directly at Emma as he continued. "Conversely, the people you can trust most are those who have been knocked down and gotten back up. They understand the value of loyalty because they know what it's like to need it." The colonel's words seemed to resonate with many of the guests, particularly those who had military connections or had faced their own challenges in life. I could see people nodding in agreement, and the atmosphere in the garden shifted once again. Emma realized she was losing the room entirely. Her carefully constructed argument about propriety and family reputation was crumbling in the face of principled opposition from multiple directions. She made one last desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative. "This is ridiculous," she declared loudly. "I'm the maid of honor. I've put weeks of work into organizing this wedding. You can't just throw me aside for someone who wasn't even invited." "Actually," Sarah said quietly, "you put weeks of work into reorganizing a wedding that was already perfectly planned. And you seem to have forgotten that being maid of honor isn't about status or recognition. It's about supporting the bride on her most important day. Rachel has done that today, even at personal cost. Can you say the same?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Emma opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again, apparently realizing that anything she said would only make her position worse. Patricia, who had been silent throughout this exchange, finally spoke up. Her voice was subdued, lacking the authoritative tone she'd used throughout the wedding planning process. "Perhaps," she said carefully, "we should focus on celebrating Sarah and Marcus rather than continuing this discussion." It was as close to a concession as anyone was likely to get from Patricia Chen, and everyone seemed to recognize it as such. Emma looked at her aunt with betrayal and disbelief, clearly having expected more support from that quarter. Marcus nodded approvingly at his new mother-in-law's attempt at diplomacy. "Mrs. Chen is right. This is supposed to be a celebration of love and commitment. I suggest we move forward in that spirit. But Emma wasn't ready to concede defeat. She had one more card to play, and the desperation in her eyes suggested she was prepared to use it, regardless of the consequences. "If that's how this family operates," she said, her voice dripping with venom, "then perhaps it's time everyone knew the whole truth about what kind of person you're all choosing to defend." She pulled out her phone, and the malicious smile that crossed her face made my blood run cold. Whatever she was about to reveal, I knew it was going to be ugly. The malicious gleam in Emma's eyes sent a chill through the entire wedding party. Whatever she was about to reveal from her phone, it was clear she intended it to be devastating. I felt my stomach drop as I realized she'd probably been saving her most damaging ammunition for exactly this moment. "Since everyone seems so concerned with the truth about character," Emma announced, her voice carrying across the silent garden, "perhaps you'd all like to know about Rachel's recent activities that she's been hiding from everyone." My mind raced through every possible secret she could have uncovered. Had she found something about my financial struggles that I hadn't shared? Had she discovered some embarrassing detail about my divorce that hadn't been made public? I braced myself for whatever humiliation was about to be unleashed. But Marcus stepped forward before Emma could continue, his military bearing radiating authority and control. "Ma'am, I'm going to stop you right there," he said, his voice carrying the unmistakable tone of command. "Whatever you think you know, whatever you're planning to share, I want you to consider, very carefully, whether destroying someone's reputation at my wedding is really the legacy you want to leave here today." Emma faltered for a moment, clearly not having expected to be challenged so directly. "I'm trying to protect this family." "No," Marcus interrupted firmly. "You're trying to win an argument by any means necessary. That's not protection, that's destruction." Colonel Patterson moved to stand beside Marcus, presenting a united front of military authority that was impossible to ignore. "Young lady," the colonel said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of absolute command, "in my experience, people who threaten to reveal secrets in public gatherings are rarely motivated by noble intentions. I strongly suggest you reconsider your course of action." But Emma had gone too far to back down now. Her face was flushed with determination and desperation. "Fine," she said, raising her phone triumphantly. "Since no one wants to hear the truth, I'll just read directly from Rachel's own social media post from last month." She began scrolling through her phone with theatrical precision, clearly having prepared for this moment. Let's see. Here we have Rachel Morrison posting about her new volunteer work at the Downtown Veterans Center. How she's been spending her evenings and weekends helping homeless veterans apply for benefits and housing assistance. The garden fell completely silent. This was clearly not the devastating revelation anyone had been expecting, least of all Emma herself, who was staring at her phone screen with growing confusion. "Wait," she muttered, scrolling frantically. There was something else." Marcus and Colonel Patterson exchanged a meaningful look. The Veterans Center was well known in military circles as a legitimate and respected organization that provided crucial services to former service members struggling with the transition to civilian life. "Ma'am," Colonel Patterson said, his voice now carrying a note of genuine curiosity, "are you telling us that Rachel has been volunteering her time to help veterans?" Emma's face was growing redder by the moment as she continued scrolling through her phone. "No, that's not the point. There was something about financial irregularities, about her being investigated." "For what?" Sarah asked, her voice sharp with growing anger. "Emma, what exactly are you accusing my best friend of?" I found my voice for the first time since this latest drama had begun. "I can answer that," I said, stepping forward. 3 weeks ago, I was contacted by the IRS regarding some discrepancies in the Veterans Center's tax filings. They needed someone with financial management experience to help review their books and identify where the problems were coming from. Marcus's eyebrows rose with interest. And it turned out that their previous bookkeeper had been embezzling money intended for veteran services, I continued. I spent 2 weeks working with federal auditors to trace the missing funds and help them recover what they could. The investigation is ongoing, but the Veterans Center has been cleared of any wrongdoing. The revelation hit the crowd like a thunderbolt. Instead of revealing some scandal about my past, Emma had inadvertently exposed the fact that I'd been working with federal authorities to combat fraud against veterans, hardly the character assassination she'd been planning. Colonel Patterson's expression shifted from cautious neutrality to obvious approval. Ms. Morrison, are you telling us that you've been working pro bono with the IRS to help recover stolen funds from a veterans charity? Yes, sir, I replied, feeling my cheeks flush with embarrassment at the attention. It wasn't anything heroic. I just have experience with financial audits from my divorce proceedings, and the Veterans Center needed help they couldn't afford to pay for. Emma was staring at her phone in horror, clearly realizing that her attempt at character assassination had backfired spectacularly. But there were articles. There was negative press. About the embezzlement, David Chen said quietly. Not about Rachel. Emma, did you even read the articles you found? Or did you just see Rachel's name associated with an IRS investigation and assume the worst? The silence that followed was deafening. It was becoming clear to everyone present that Emma had constructed her entire campaign against me based on incomplete information and malicious assumptions. Sarah walked over to Emma, her wedding dress rustling softly in the garden breeze. When she spoke, her voice was filled with a disappointed sadness that was somehow more devastating than anger would have been. Emma, you spent weeks trying to destroy my friendship with someone who has been spending her free time helping homeless veterans, Sarah said. You convinced my mother that Rachel was a bad influence, that she would bring scandal to our family. But the only scandal here is how ready you were to believe the worst about someone you barely know. Patricia Chen looked stricken as the full implications of what had transpired began to sink in. She'd banned her daughter's best friend from the wedding based on Emma's research, and that research had been fundamentally flawed from the beginning. I didn't realize, Patricia stammered, looking around at the faces of the wedding guests with growing mortification. Mrs. Chen, I said gently, you were trying to protect your daughter. I understand that. But maybe next time, you could try talking to me directly instead of relying on secondhand investigations. Emma made one last desperate attempt to salvage her position. This doesn't change her past, she said weakly. The divorce, the allegations. We're 3 years ago, Marcus interrupted firmly. And from what I can see, she spent those 3 years rebuilding her life and serving others. That's exactly the kind of character development that deserves respect, not suspicion. Frank, the elderly veteran who had helped me with the flower arrangement, had been standing quietly at the edge of the crowd throughout this entire exchange. Now he stepped forward, his Vietnam War veteran cap clearly visible in the afternoon sunlight. Excuse me, he said, his weathered voice carrying surprising strength. I couldn't help but overhear. Are you folks talking about Rachel Morrison from the Veterans Center? All eyes turned to the elderly man, and I felt my heart skip a beat. I hadn't expected anyone from the Veterans Center to be at the wedding, and I certainly hadn't expected to be recognized. Yes, sir, Colonel Patterson replied respectfully. Do you know Ms. Morrison? Frank's face broke into a broad smile. Know her? Son, that young lady probably saved my life. I was about to lose my apartment because the VA benefits were tied up in bureaucratic nonsense. Rachel spent 6 hours on the phone with 3 different government offices until she got my case straightened out. She's been doing that kind of work for dozens of veterans over the past few months. He looked directly at Emma with the kind of stern disapproval that only a military veteran can muster. Whatever you think you know about this young woman, I'm here to tell you that she's got more integrity in her little finger than most people have in their whole body. The validation from Frank seemed to break whatever remaining resistance existed in the crowd. Even the guests who didn't know me personally were now looking at Emma with obvious disapproval, while their expressions toward me had shifted to curiosity and respect. Emma realized she had completely lost control of the narrative. Her face crumpled with humiliation and rage, and for a moment, I actually felt sorry for her. She'd obviously believed she was protecting her family, but her methods had been so fundamentally flawed that she'd ended up creating the very scandal she'd been trying to prevent. This is insane, Emma muttered, looking around at the faces surrounding her. You're all insane if you think this changes anything. But it was clear that everything had changed. The wedding that had started as Patricia Chen's carefully orchestrated social event had become something entirely different. A public demonstration of character, loyalty, and the importance of looking beyond surface appearances. Marcus took Sarah's hand and addressed the entire wedding party. "I think we've had enough drama for one day," he said with a smile that managed to be both diplomatic and genuine. "What do you say we move on to the celebration part of this celebration?" The crowd began to murmur agreement, clearly ready to put the confrontation behind them and enjoy the reception. But Emma wasn't finished yet. She had one final card to play, and the desperate look in her eyes suggested she was about to make a decision that would change everything once again. Once again. Emma's final, desperate look made my stomach clench with dread. I'd watched her carefully constructed arguments crumble one by one, seen her humiliated in front of the entire wedding party, and witnessed her lose the moral high ground she'd thought she occupied. People who feel cornered often make their most dangerous decisions, and Emma clearly felt she had nothing left to lose. "You know what?" Emma announced, her voice rising to a pitch that carried across the entire garden. "You all want to canonize St. Rachel? Fine, but I'm not going to stand here and watch this family make the biggest mistake of their lives based on some sob story about helping veterans." She turned to face Sarah directly, her expression a mixture of desperation and calculated cruelty. "Sarah, you think you know your best friend so well? Ask her about Michael Thompson. Ask her about the real reason her marriage ended. Ask her about what she did to destroy that man's life." The name hit me like a physical blow. Michael Thompson wasn't my ex-husband. He was my ex-husband's business partner. And the mention of his name brought back memories I'd worked hard to bury. Emma had clearly done deeper digging than anyone had realized, and she'd found the one piece of my past that I genuinely was ashamed of. The garden fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different, heavier, more dangerous. I could see the uncertainty creeping back into people's faces, the doubt that Emma was hoping to plant. Sarah looked at me with confused concern. "Rachel, who is Michael Thompson?" I took a deep breath, knowing that this was the moment of truth. I could try to deflect, could minimize what had happened, could paint myself in the best possible light. But after everything that had transpired today, after watching Marcus demonstrate real honor and seeing the military guests show genuine respect for truth and character, I knew I had to be completely honest. "Michael Thompson was my ex-husband Tyler's business partner," I began, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. "During my divorce proceedings, I discovered that Tyler had been using our joint business accounts to fund his gambling addiction. When I reported this to the authorities, the investigation revealed that he'd also been embezzling money from the construction company he ran with Michael." Emma's eyes gleamed with vindication. "And what happened to Michael Thompson's business, Rachel? What happened to his family?" I closed my eyes briefly, then forced myself to continue. "The business collapsed. Michael lost everything. His company, his house, his savings. His wife left him, and he had a nervous breakdown that required hospitalization. For 2 years, I watched a good man's life fall apart because of the investigation I initiated." The admission hung in the air like an accusation. I could see doubt creeping back into people's faces, could feel the careful goodwill I'd built up starting to erode. Emma pressed her advantage ruthlessly. "So you see, this isn't about some noble volunteer work or ancient history. This is about a pattern of behavior. Rachel Morrison destroys lives. She destroyed Tyler's life, she destroyed Michael Thompson's life, and now she's going to destroy Sarah's marriage by bringing this kind of chaos into their family." But before anyone else could respond, a new voice cut through the tension, a voice I hadn't heard in 3 years but would recognize anywhere. Actually, that's not what happened at all. Everyone turned toward the garden entrance, where a tall man in his 40s was walking purposefully toward our group. He was well-dressed but not formally attired for a wedding, and his presence was clearly unexpected by everyone present. It was Michael Thompson himself. My heart stopped beating for what felt like several full seconds. Of all the people who could have appeared at this moment, Michael was perhaps the only one who could either vindicate me completely or destroy me utterly. I had no idea which it was going to be. "Michael?" I whispered, unable to believe what I was seeing. He walked directly to me, ignoring the stares and whispers from the wedding guests. When he reached me, he took my hands in a gesture that sent shocked murmurs through the crowd. "Rachel Morrison," he said, his voice warm and genuinely affectionate. "I've been looking for you for months." Emma's confidence began to falter as she realized that Michael's demeanor toward me was nothing like what she'd expected. "Mr. Thompson," she said quickly, "perhaps you could tell these people about what Rachel did to your business, about how her accusations destroyed your life." Michael turned to look at Emma with the kind of calm assessment that suggested he'd dealt with difficult people before. "Ma'am, I don't know who you are or where you got your information, but you clearly don't know the whole story." He addressed the entire wedding party, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had survived genuine hardship and come out stronger. "Yes, my business collapsed. Yes, I lost my house and my marriage. Yes, I had a breakdown that required medical intervention. But none of that was Rachel's fault." Michael looked back at me with an expression of profound gratitude that I didn't understand. "Rachel didn't destroy my life, she saved it." The confusion on everyone's faces was evident, including my own. I had no idea what Michael was talking about. The investigation that Rachel initiated revealed that Tyler Morrison had been embezzling from our company for over 2 years, Michael continued. But what she didn't know at the time was that I'd been covering for Tyler because he was blackmailing me. He paused, clearly steeling himself for a difficult admission. Tyler had discovered that I'd been struggling with alcohol addiction and had made some poor financial decisions during my drinking. He threatened to expose those mistakes unless I helped him cover up his gambling losses. I was trapped, watching him steal from our clients while being unable to stop him without destroying my own reputation. The wedding guests were hanging on every word now, the drama having taken yet another unexpected turn. "When Rachel went to the authorities, she didn't just expose Tyler's crimes," Michael said. "She gave me the courage to tell the truth about my own problems." The investigation revealed everything. Tyler's gambling, my drinking, the blackmail, all of it. And yes, it destroyed my business and my marriage. But it also freed me from a situation that was slowly killing me. He looked directly at me as he continued. "Rachel, you never knew this, but after the investigation ended, I went into rehabilitation. I've been sober for 2.5 years now. I've rebuilt my life, found a new career, and learned what real integrity looks like. The breakdown I had wasn't because of what you did. It was because of what I'd been doing to myself for years." Emma's face had gone completely white. But the article said... "The article said what everyone assumed at the time," Michael replied calmly, "that I was an innocent victim of someone else's crimes. It was easier to let people believe that than to admit the truth about my own failures. But I've learned that living a lie, even a comfortable one, isn't really living at all." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Rachel, I've been trying to find you because I wanted to give you this. It's a letter from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, officially clearing you of any wrongdoing in the investigation of Tyler Morrison and acknowledging your cooperation in exposing a pattern of fraud that extended far beyond just our construction company." I took the letter with shaking hands, barely able to process what was happening. "Michael, I had no idea." "I know you didn't," he said gently. "You did what was right without knowing the full consequences. And you've been carrying guilt that was never yours to bear. Tyler's choices destroyed Tyler's life. My choices nearly destroyed mine. But your choice to tell the truth? That saved both of us, even if it took me a while to realize it." Colonel Patterson stepped forward, his military bearing unchanged, but his expression now showing obvious respect. "Mr. Thompson, are you saying that Ms. Morrison's actions helped expose a larger criminal conspiracy?" "Yes, sir," Michael replied. The FBI investigation that followed revealed that Tyler had been running a complex fraud scheme involving multiple construction projects and federal contracts. Rachel's initial report led to the recovery of over $2 million in stolen funds and prevented additional fraud that could have cost taxpayers tens of millions. The revelation sent another wave of shocked murmurs through the wedding party. Emma looked like she might collapse as she realized that her final attempt to discredit me had backfired even more spectacularly than her previous efforts. Marcus stepped forward and extended his hand to Michael. "Sir, thank you for coming here today and setting the record straight. That took real courage." Michael shook Marcus's hand firmly. Captain, I've learned that courage isn't about avoiding difficult situations. It's about facing them honestly and accepting the consequences of your choices. Rachel taught me that lesson, even though she didn't know she was teaching it. Sarah had been watching this entire exchange with tears streaming down her face. Now she walked over to me and wrapped me in an embrace that felt like it might never end. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry I doubted you. I'm sorry I let them make me doubt you." "You didn't know," I replied, holding her tightly. "None of us knew the whole story." Patricia Chen approached us hesitantly, her earlier confidence completely gone. "Rachel," she said quietly, "I owe you an enormous apology. I let fear and prejudice cloud my judgment, and I nearly ruined my daughter's most important day because of it." I looked at Patricia, seeing genuine remorse in her eyes for the first time since I'd known her. "Mrs. Chen, you were trying to protect your family. I understand that impulse, even if I disagreed with your methods." "That's very generous of you," Patricia replied, "but generosity doesn't excuse my behavior. I hope you'll allow me to make amends." Emma, meanwhile, had been standing frozen in place as her world collapsed around her. Finally, she seemed to find her voice. I didn't know," she stammered. "The articles, the timeline. I thought I was protecting the family." Michael turned to address Emma directly, his voice firm but not unkind. "Ma'am, let me give you some advice based on hard-earned experience. When you make assumptions about people based on incomplete information, you're not protecting anyone. You're just creating the kind of chaos and pain that destroys families and friendships." He looked around at the entire wedding party as he continued. "Real protection comes from getting to know people, from giving them the benefit of the doubt, and from recognizing that everyone has a story that's more complicated than it appears on the surface." David Chen stepped forward and put his arm around his daughter. "I think we've all learned some valuable lessons today about the importance of truth, loyalty, and giving people the chance to tell their own stories." Marcus nodded in agreement. "And I think we've also learned something about the difference between honor that's based on appearances and honor that's based on actions. Rachel, what you did 3 years ago took real courage. Even if you didn't know it at the time, what you did today took even more courage." Colonel Patterson addressed the entire gathering with the authority of his rank and experience. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've witnessed many ceremonies in my military career, but I've rarely seen such a clear demonstration of character under pressure. Today we've seen what real honor looks like, what genuine loyalty means, and what true friendship can withstand." He turned to Marcus and Sarah. "Captain Rodriguez, you and your bride are fortunate to have people in your lives who are willing to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. That's the foundation of a marriage that will last." Frank, the elderly veteran, raised his voice from the edge of the crowd. "If I may," he called out, "I'd like to propose a toast." Someone quickly provided glasses of champagne, and Frank raised his glass high. "To Rachel Morrison," he said, his voice carrying across the garden, "for teaching us all that real character isn't about having a perfect past. It's about learning from your experiences and using that knowledge to help others." The entire wedding party raised their glasses in agreement. Even Emma, who looked thoroughly chastened but seemed to be making an effort to participate in the reconciliation. "To Rachel," the crowd echoed, and I felt overwhelmed by the unexpected turn of events. Marcus raised his own glass. "And to Sarah," he added, "for having the wisdom to choose friends based on their hearts rather than their histories." Sarah smiled through her tears. "And to all of us," she said, "for learning that the best families aren't the ones who never have problems. They're the ones who work through their problems together." As the champagne toast concluded, Patricia Chen approached me one more time. "Rachel," she said, "I know this doesn't make up for what I put you through, but I hope you'll consider taking your rightful place as maid of honor for the reception. Emma has graciously agreed to step aside." I looked over at Emma, who nodded with obvious embarrassment but what appeared to be genuine remorse. "I'm sorry, Rachel," she said quietly. "I let my fears and prejudices turn me into someone I don't want to be." "We all make mistakes, Emma," I replied. "What matters is what we do after we realize we've made them." Marcus clapped his hands together, bringing the focus back to the celebration. "All right, everyone. I believe we have a reception to attend and a marriage to celebrate. What do you say we focus on the future instead of the past?" The wedding party began moving toward the reception hall, but Michael caught my arm gently. "Rachel, before you go, I wanted you to know something else. I've started a new construction company, and I specialize in building affordable housing for veterans. I've been looking for someone with your financial expertise and your commitment to helping veterans to join my team. Would you be interested in hearing more?" I stared at him in amazement. "Michael, are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a partnership," he replied with a smile. "Someone who's willing to risk their own reputation to expose fraud and help veterans deserves to be an owner, not just an employee." As we walked toward the reception hall together, I reflected on the incredible journey this day had taken. I'd started the morning as an outcast, banned from my best friend's wedding and carrying guilt about events I'd never fully understood. I was ending the evening as the maid of honor at a celebration of love and forgiveness, with a new career opportunity and a deeper understanding of my own worth. Sarah linked her arm through mine as we entered the reception hall. "So," she said with a mischievous grin, "I think this wedding turned out even better than we originally planned." I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. "You know what? I think you're absolutely right." The reception that followed was everything a wedding celebration should be: joyful, meaningful, and filled with love. But more than that, it was a celebration of second chances, of the power of truth to overcome prejudice, and of the kind of loyalty that can survive even the most difficult tests. As I watched Sarah and Marcus share their first dance as husband and wife, I realized that sometimes the most important battles aren't fought on distant battlefields or in corporate boardrooms. Sometimes they're fought in wedding gardens, by ordinary people who choose to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. And sometimes, when you have the courage to face the truth about yourself and others, you discover that the very thing you thought would destroy you was actually the key to your salvation all along. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.